Hey everyone, and welcome to our spoiler review for the first 4 episodes of season 6 of The Crown. For those of you who may be stumbling upon this, surprised that Laura and I are reviewing The Crown. Oh my gosh. I'm just so ready to jump into everything that I'm stumbling over my words. Anyway, for those of you who may be surprised by this, Laura and I did review season 5 of The Crown. We're both big fans of The Crown, so we're back now to talk about season 6. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, joined as always by the great Laura Kelly for these reviews. Laura, how are you? How are you feeling? Season 6, the first 4 episodes are upon us. We've watched them. We're ready to spoiler review them. What are you feeling? How are you thinking about The Crown right now?
I'm enjoying the sort of 90s time capsule that this season is, at least the beginning of this season. And I mistyped the frown several times, so no worries on your calling it the wrong thing. We can do the clown, we can be the frown, but no, this is The Crown. I'm very excited to be back talking to you about this show because normally we talk about Star Wars.
Yes.
So this is mixing it up a little bit for me. But I overall enjoyed the first 4 episodes of this season. Haven't really read a lot. I haven't really read reviews. I've seen a lot of headlines. Seems pretty mixed so far, which I'm kind of surprised by because I was thoroughly entertained, moved, touched so many different times watching these first 4 episodes. So overall, my reaction was pretty positive. What did you think? Because this has always been something for you where, like, I feel like you can always bring in your sort of personal experience and what you remember about these times, and we're getting closer and closer to the time where I can now also participate in that. But what were your thoughts on this overall?
I mean, the first 4 episodes deal concretely with the death of Diana, and we begin with the opening scenes of the first episode, which is called Persona non grata. It is, a French guy walking his dog there in Paris, leading to hearing the sounds of the accident. And then later we revisit that at the end of episode 3 when we get to the accident. So I was really surprised that this was essentially the main focus of these 4 episodes was this accident. I thought, because The Crown always likes to mix in these other more real world things to kind of balance it out, it's very heavily towards Diana's accident. And that speaks to the respect that Peter Morgan and love I'm sure he has for who Princess Diana was, and the respect and admiration for her, which I also shared. And so it was an interesting experience to go through these 4 episodes. I liked them. I enjoyed them. Do I have some quibbles here and there? Yes. But overall, I really enjoyed the show coming back. And this is what you do. You take your strongest actor, and I would argue that Elizabeth Debicki, aside from maybe Jonathan Pryce, is the strongest actor so far in this particular iteration of this cast of The Crown. Imelda is good, but I don't really sense that she's at the same level as Claire Foy or Olivia Colman for me. So you focus on Elizabeth Debicki, and it is Diana, and you go through this process, and you explore what happened, and you give a little more insight into the relationship with Dodi Fayed, and also how, and you don't repeat the Queen, which is something Peter Morgan directed and wrote. So you just take elements of it to weave it in here, while also showing the reaction and the aftermath, as is the title of the 4th episode, of the loss of Diana and Dodi. I don't want to disrespect Dodi Fayed's passing as well, and how it affects their families, their respective families throughout. So I liked it. I liked the pacing of it. I liked the interactions. I liked that we got a little Camilla Parker in that first episode, and then little spots here and there. But the Charles and Diana dynamic and how it's matured, I thought was really interesting as well in seeing this. And then I know that Dodi Fayed and the Mohamed Fayad issues were popping up for people that they felt that it was a little cliche-ish, the father-son stuff, but I didn't find that it was out of the realm of reality. So I kind of bought into it. And I know for me, I was really surprised to see how much of that relationship we got a window into that wasn't as strong as some of the narratives that came out after the accident would have led you to believe.
Yeah, this relationship, and I think it's a general theme through this show, has been parenting fathers and sons, and,
Right.
and especially when you rope the Queen into that and how she has parented her children. But I think that this relationship between the two of them, between Mohamed and Dodi in particular, is really interesting to watch because Dodi, I think, was by the end of last season, his characterization changes a lot this season. I think he's
Yeah.
portrayed in a much more favorable light. There's a little bit more like victimization, I think, of him
Mhm.
in this season, whereas last season he came off as a spoiled brat for a lot of it, to be
Yeah.
totally honest. So they went a different direction, I think, with it this season. And I really like how he's portrayed. I really like how this actor plays him. He's
Yeah.
very charming. And what they do with Muhammad Al Fayed, though, I'm like, this was really extreme. And now we
Yeah.
saw some extremes last season too. You know, we see his sort of racism a lot, I think,
Yes.
in last season, and then we get that really sort of central episode about him where he goes through the whole his whole relationship.
Mhm.
I think it was with his valet
Yeah.
or somebody who worked for him. That whole episode was so moving, and how they sort of come together and
Yeah.
build this relationship, and it's really beautiful, and you kind of get this redemption a little bit for him. And then they throw you into this season, and I'm just it's the whiplash is
Mm.
it's a little bit intense, but he's he's demonized very much in this season and comes off much more sinister. Whether any of that is based on fact,
Mm.
I imagine at least some of it is. But it's really I think alarming, especially in
Yeah.
episode 3, this conversation that he has with his son over the phone,
Yeah.
where basically it's like, you never deserved any of the things I gave to you or any of the respect I want to give to you now. For like, it was really alarming. And I think that characterization between the two of them made for a really entertaining storytelling, really good writing, and really great performances from these two actors,
Yeah.
especially the actor who's playing Muhammad Al Fayed. I kind of hope that this actor gets some recognition in terms of like award season,
Yeah.
because he, I think, is doing a lot this season that I don't know, that I really appreciated. What did you think?
Yeah, Khalid Abdalla. I thought he was fantastic as Dodi, because it's not an easy role to play, right? Like
No.
you've got to navigate the fact that he was actually in real life engaged to another woman. She did actually sue him. Gloria Allred was her lawyer when she sued for this idea of breakup, because she claimed she gave up all this stuff. So in a way, he's cuckolded by her and cuckolded by her dad, by his dad as well, in numerous situations. So you almost feel empathy and sympathy for him, because he does it. How much of this is authentic, his feelings for Diana, and how much of it is him trying to please his father? It's all mixed in. So when we have their conversation, that third episode, Dismal, where they have the conversation about like their relationship and their care, and he's like, is he going to propose? Is he not going to propose? This whole thing. And then when he does, how Diana is like, oh my God, no, let's have this conversation. And she's even gracious enough to know that he is not actually on the phone with his father when he's supposedly standing up for himself. Like, there is these little moments that is very difficult for an actor to play and not become maudlin or a caricature or one dimensional woe is me. He plays he dances in between these emotions so well that I agree with you. He does an excellent job just making you understand a little more of the inner life and inner turmoil of Dodi Fayed. And I agree with you about the Momo Fayed situation. Was he involved in this? Was he as Machiavellian as you might think? Maybe not, but certainly what we got last season, seeing his love for the West, and that comes back in the final conversation he has with what is maybe the ghost of his son there coming to visit him, telling him not to revere the West so much, not to be in love with the West so much. And that kind of puts everything in perspective, that like everything he did was essentially try to get himself in favor with the Queen and with the British monarchy and the royalty there, and how that kind of blew up in his face. And in behind the scenes stuff with manipulating the photographer, most of the sources say that is not true, that he did not do that, that
Yeah.
was most likely Diana who set that
Yeah.
up and was trying to make her other recent relationship, the breakup, trying to make the man that she was in, which I think was the heart surgeon we saw last season, make him jealous, is what she was essentially trying to do with the paparazzi. And of course, not denigrating Princess Diana, who I love madly and sadly was killed here. But, the honest truth was she was able to do these things. And we do see a scene with her with the tabloid photographers coming out in that leopard bikini, in essence, or cheetah bikini, and getting the pictures taken. to negotiate the deal. So certainly that is something that she had done. So, but I do want to ask you this, because we want to give credit to the directors, Alex Gabassi, and who did the first episode there, Persona non grata, and Christian Swacho. I hope that's how you say his name, who did 2 photographs, Disma We and Aftermath. I have to ask you, how do you think, as a person who is not as emotionally tied to Diana as I am, how did you think they navigated all of this through the 4 episodes? Because essentially these 4 episodes are just essentially a 4-hour movie. And so what are your thoughts about how they navigated this particular section into the passing of Diana?
Well, I really liked the structure of this story. I was kind of surprised to see that it was a different director for one of them, because it all flowed very seamlessly together. The fact that the first episode opens up at night, right off the bat, acknowledging the elephant in the room. We know exactly where this season is headed. And I remember reading ahead of time, they had said, we're going to do, we're going to cover the car crash in the show, but we're going to do it in as tasteful as a way as we can. And I think that they were successful in that. We didn't get up close and personal to it, except with Mohamed, sort of his point of view was kind of the closest that we got to it. I thought that they executed on it very well. I thought it was done very classy. I feel like I've seen a little bit of maybe not so positive reaction on the sort of ghosts of Diana and Dodi, or the memories of them, whatever you want to call them, because I'm not sure if I necessarily think of it as ghosts. I guess it's really kind of more of like, the character that's seeing them, it's the reflection that, that they're sort of interpreting from it. But I thought that was well done. I thought it was moving. I know that wasn't everybody's cup of tea, and I can totally understand why. But overall, I thought this was great. I do think that, you mentioned a little bit, like, there's good evidence to support that Diana is the one that actually called the paparazzi to take those photos. It wasn't necessarily Mohamed Fayad, but she's characterized in a very positive light in this season, in this episode. And I mean, this show has also portrayed Charles in a very positive light. Like they give very favorable treatment to several of these characters, whether they deserve it or not. But with Diana, they do kind of touch on it. She has this conversation with her therapist at one point where she talks about, like, maybe you shouldn't be involved with these people. These people are just going to bring drama into your life. We're trying to separate you from that drama so that, which can certainly be an addiction. And maybe that was a play here, I think. At least that's kind of how they're portraying it in this story. But overall, I thought it was very well done. I think they make some, they're very true, I think, I think Elizabeth Debicki is so good as Diana. I think she's so true to that. She's got, like, the voice, she's got the looks, she's got the, like, just the way she carries herself in the role, I think, is so well done. I wouldn't be surprised to see, I think, awards buzz for her too. But there's a confounding nature to it all too with Diana, which I think Elizabeth really captures well. Like, there is this, and she really did. We saw it glimpse last season, of course, with the AIDS situation and visiting the patients. In this season, we get to see the landmine thing become a very big deal, which I remember being one of the final causes that she was very involved in. And I thought they did a nice job with touching on that. They didn't sink into that and really spend a lot of time with that, but certainly they showed how, even with the best of intentions of trying to do good work in the world, she was just too famous that it eventually would bleed, her personal life would bleed into all of those causes. Like in the press conference that we see in the show, in these first 4 episodes, what happens there when those photos leak of her kissing Dodi and what that means and all of that. So it gets in the way. But we see from the first episode, when she's going to visit Tony Blair and his wife there and their kids, that, like, she has a genuine interest in wanting to do something more. Her natural instinct was to be a humanitarian, was to fight for certain causes and make herself available to them. But unfortunately, she was also wrapped up in the drama of the royal family, and that is such a massive shadow. So we see how that plays itself out through these 4 episodes, right, leading to her passing. And, like, I love the interaction she had with Charles about co-parenting and being partners, and can we make this work or not? So you see that there is an effort here as they're older now, right? We have to remember it's not just right after season 5. There's certainly been time. The kids have grown up, so it's been a little bit of time. And so we see her natural change. But
when she's on the boat with Dodi, it is fascinating because initially she certainly likes, it seems like from the performance, she likes the idea of the challenge of being with him, the idea, this idea of approaching wanting to be with someone who is connected to this much wealth or security, or maybe wanting, taking a man from another woman. There's a little bit of a playful, childish glee to that, or impish glee that I see in her face at times. But then as the relationship progresses, you can tell how she's scoffing at him when she's on the phone with her friend about the poem that he engraved and was too far. And it leads to the interaction they have there. When I'm sure, as a woman, I'm sure you've had those moments like, oh boy, calm it down. And you have the interactions here with her and him there when he's possibly going to propose. And she really comes to the humanitarian side of her, comes to the front in that scene where she's saying, listen, I am barely out of a marriage. I am nowhere near ready to be married. You're still tangled with this person that you're trying to untangle from. And we should not get married just because your dad wants us to get married. Give it time. But you can tell she was never going to marry him. And she even says that to her kids when they ask her. She very honestly says, I'm not going to marry him. But she knew he was a good person and wanted him to stand up for himself and fight against his father. So that when we see her later after the death and she shows up in these, what I imagine are, in their minds, created conversations. And this does happen. After I lost my father, I certainly had conversations with my father as if he was there. And that's just how you process grief sometimes. So I didn't mind the choice to have her coming back and having these conversations. Now, do the scenes let them off the hook? Yes, I would agree with that. But I didn't mind the creative choice of bringing Dodi and Diana back to have these interactions. And I loved the interaction with her and Dominic West of Debicki as Charles. The back and forth I thought was great. And with the Queen as well, which I thought was really poignant to have their back and forth. Because I also think Imelda Staunton walked that line really well of caring for Diana, but also being frustrated by Diana and her tabloid obsession. So, yeah, I liked how that went down.
The relationship, I think, between Dodi and Diana is a really fun journey to go on in this season in particular. And I like where they end up. They end up in this great position, like as friends. And it just is a really, nobody knows what these real conversations were that happened behind closed doors when it was just the two of them in the room. But looking at this from a story perspective and how they characterized it, I thought it was just really well done. I love how they ended as friends, and they, you get that last shot of them in the car where they're holding hands. I'm just like, oh, it just like tore me apart completely.
Yeah, but I do want to say, like, I do think the accident, there is a, like, they don't go into, and maybe they will in the subsequent episodes, but I doubt it. They don't go into how this guy shouldn't have been driving, because we find out later, because he died in the accident, the driver as well, but we find out later that like his license had been suspended. He had issues with drinking. There was like all these things that he should not have been driving the car. And I wish they had spent a little more time with that, so we would add even more to the tragedy of it all. But maybe they didn't feel the need to go deeper into that. What did you think about how Charles was portrayed here in these 4 episodes? Dominic West, you mentioned earlier, Laura, that you felt they kind of let Charles off the hook, or they portray him in a much more sympathetic light than we've been kind of led to believe or seen in real life tabloids and articles and stories and what have you. And certainly last season, some of those things that he's going through, they were not very complimentary. Tampon Gate being one of them. But when we get to this, when we get to this season, he's older, but still frustrated that Diana is taking center stage still over Camilla Parker Bowles. We see the 50th birthday party, him wanting to his mom to kind of essentially bless the relationship, and then him wanting to wage war in the tabloids to get favorable coverage of his wife. And then we see, him having this conversation with Diana about the co-parenting, which seems positive. And then she dies. And when she dies, the reaction and the sobbing that they can hear through the door, the pushing for Diana to get essentially a royal treatment in terms of the burial, and the conversations with his sons. And then at the end there, the conversation with with Diana and with the Queen eventually to kind of put everything, I guess, bury everything and then move forward. What did you think about how they did this and how Dominic West portrayed Charles in these 4 episodes?
With the way that the episode Aftermath kind of becomes about him and his reaction to Diana, I really wanted to dislike it. I wanted to not be happy about how they took this tragedy of Diana and made it about him. I wanted to not like that, but I can't help it. It was really well done. I think they do, like I said, I do think they portrayed him in a very favorable light, but at the same time, very beginning of this season, or beginning of this season, he's kind of still his like petulant self going, what is it like? What about love, mummy? I mean, like that was just that line delivery was just on point. It was beautiful. But like that scene at Camilla's party, he's so charming.
Yeah.
I mean, that letter that the letter that he reads from Persuasion, like it all comes off so favorable, and he's so smiley and happy, and Margaret has to report to Elizabeth how happy he is. And, we see him, I think, kind of come through quite a bit. And when he gets to the other side and gets to this, this season 6, they've been at this now for, since 2016. I think he's coming out on the other end here in a very positive light. We see him and Diana have that truce and kind of agree to co-parent as partners. And then he seems genuinely hurt when he hears her kind of smack him in the press a little bit when his press guy reports that to him. So
right.
Like I said, I wanted to hate that episode 4 kind of became about him, but the way that Dominic West portrays Charles and the way that he, this show sort of characterizes him, I just couldn't hate him. And I shouldn't like it, but I thought overall that it was really well done. And I thought that his performance in episode 4 was so incredibly moving. His reaction to seeing Diana in the hospital and his having to defend the decision and really try to, he goes to bat for her against his family, who really are just like, you divorced. This was your, this is what you did. You amputated this relationship and divorced her from this family. And now here you, like, what is going on? So I thought that overall it was well done. I thought that the conversation they had on the plane with the memory Diana that has this conversation with him where she's, says things like, I was always in love with you. I'm like, I mean, like, that's where I'm kind of like, this is his memory of her. This is so Charles' interpretation of what Diana is. I don't look at this as this morbid thing. This is just, it's his memory sort of reflecting back at him. And that's, that's what you're going to get when it's your own interpretation of a person like that. So I overall, I just really wanted to be unhappy with it because I'm like, I just don't want this story to become about him when it should be about her, and it should be about her sons and their reaction, and it's all becoming, but it just worked. I can't explain how, but it worked for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It worked as well. And like I said, I said this back when we first doing, I think season 5. I was not a fan of Charles for a very, very long time because of the cheating on Diana and my reverence for her. I certainly have never liked Camilla Parker Bowles for that as well. And now, King Charles, I guess I should say. But now, but seeing the portrayal here, it's an interesting experience because I have to, in essence, separate the real Charles from what Dominic West is doing. And this is the Charles for this version of the monarchy that is based on the actual monarchy. So for this version, I liked it. And I thought it was honest and real, because the thing is, in relationships, and especially as you get older, it's a different approach than when you're young. Young is all piss and vinegar. When you get older is when you settle into things, you have more perspective, you've been through the battles. And if someone still wants to be by your side, even if it's not in a romantic way, but still in a friendship or partnership way, there's an appreciation that you have. If you have any kind of self-awareness, there's an appreciation you have for that person. So them having the conversation, I thought really worked in terms of the co-partnering. And then later, I think, Laura, you bring up an excellent point. This is through his mind. So he's naturally going to give himself a little more grace in the relationship and in the situation. He's going to woe is me it because he loves to be the woe is me guy. But he's also going to have her give him some semblance of a blessing that he can move forward. And she even says, it'll be easier for everybody now that I'm not around. And don't lie to me and tell me you haven't thought that already. And so it's in a way of calling him out. So she does let him off the hook, but she still calls him out, or his perception of her calls him out. And I think that's valid, and so I appreciate and I agree with you. The emotion, the wailing first in the room and then outside the room when we see people hearing his wailing, I thought was incredible. And fighting for the stuff for Diana there for the funeral and for the attention, and then which leads to the Queen delivering that speech live. I thought all of that really worked. And I agree with you. I didn't want to like Charles, but Dominic West's version of Charles, I like. And I'm slowly, quietly cheering for. And I like Olivia Williams' portrayal of Camilla Parker Bowles. So I want to see what this leads to in the upcoming episodes, which, of course, is going to drop in the middle of December. Let's move on to Dodi and Mohamed Fayad. So you were kind of alluding to their relationship, Laura. What are your thoughts on how they handled this relationship over these 4 episodes and what it ultimately led to, which was another final post-death conversation between Dodi and his father?
I mean, Mohammed's saying that Dodi should be thanking him for bringing the Princess of Wales to him on a silver platter. I'm like, he's just out here saying the quiet part out loud. The entire season, or the first 4 episodes of the show, that's all he's doing. I mean, it's maddening watching it. And it really makes you sympathize with Dodi. He really, at the end of the day, at least in this story, is just a pawn in his father's chess game and his father's effort to gain British citizenship and to climb the social ladder. And it's really, some parts of it are kind of hard to watch. I mean, I kind of alluded to that conversation where he says, he says to Dodi, if you marry her, you'll be rich and powerful and you'll be my equal. And I'm like, my jaw dropped. He says he'll make his father or he'll make him a full partner in his father's company. And he says, like, we've never offered that before. He's like, you never deserved it. I'm like, what has he done to deserve it now? He's like just dating this woman that you push. Like, it just is, it's so over the top to the point of almost extreme, but it's not so extreme that it's not believable. I mean, we've seen, this complicated story of a father and son. We've seen this story play out in this show even several times between fathers and sons. And this is it kind of just ups the ante on all of it. It just seems rather extreme. But I do wonder a little bit, like, how much of the sort of portrayal of him in this show is taken from what we were getting in real life back in those days, where what I'm trying to get at is, like, I wonder how much racism was playing in to things in the press back then. I wasn't there I don't remember seeing it. And I'm very curious to kind of see how that played into things, and they don't address it head on really in this. You see it a little bit, and I think Dodi actually mentions that he doesn't like seeing his life played out in papers. He doesn't like, especially with the prejudice that's coming with it. But I like that they touched on it. I kind of wish that they would have asked that question a little bit more, just because I'm kind of curious as to, like, how exactly was all of this being interpreted by the general public.
I think that's a fascinating thing you bring up, and should give love to Salim Daw, who plays Mohamed Fayed Al Fayed. I thought their chemistry as father and son has been fantastic, and certainly he has such a strong energy, Mohamed Al Fayed, that, like, you can understand how a more sensitive kid like Dodi would kind of be overwhelmed by it, or wilt, or be able to be manipulated by it to be put in this position. Because it's ironic, because they both have the same needs, and that is Mohammed wants to be accepted and loved by the monarchy, who he essentially sees as kind of like this father figure, and Dodi wants to be accepted and seen by his own father. So they both are kind of in this path, and they're willing to do things that they wouldn't normally be willing to do for anyone else in order to maybe achieve that love, right? Mohammed is essentially, as you said, manipulating the situation. Like, he makes sure that his son's fiance is, like, on the smaller boat. The banishers are there. He makes sure that he is there for Diana to try to force this union to happen, essentially matchmaking this union. He calls the maid, he calls the guy who's in charge of the boat to find out, are they sleeping together? These kinds of things. So this it becomes an obsession, because his desire to be accepted by this thing is what drives everything and manipulates his mind to believe that everything he's doing is correct because it's leading to this ultimate goal. And in essence, he removes the humanity of his son because he, as you said, treats him like a pawn to try to get what he wants through Diana. And even treating Diana like a pawn by trying to force her in a way or make the situation available to her to be with Dodi. And then even convinces himself post-death that this was a love for the ages, even though they had like been together for like a few weeks. This was a love for the ages. He was going to propose. The poem, all this stuff, he fabricates in his mind that they had a much stronger relationship than they actually had, and pushed that narrative. I know post the accident that led to the deaths, that was a narrative that was pushed by certain people in the press, probably by Mohamed paying them to push that narrative that they had this, this all-encompassing relationship and marriage. Except people who are close to Diana say very clearly it was not that way at all. And so you see that, and you see him play it, so that when we lead to that moment with them together, I thought it was a really poignant moment. And by the way, his reaction to seeing his son, oh my God, that was devastating. I texted you that. That is very similar to the reaction I had seeing my father in the morgue. It is an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody, but it is just devastating to see what was once so full of life just lying there still. And so it was a brilliant acting performance. He didn't go too far. It was perfect. So that when we get to that moment when he's having a conversation with his son, it is all apologies. It is all wanting forgiveness. And as you said, it is through his point of view. So his son does give him that ultimate forgiveness at the end, while also calling him out just a little bit. And I wonder if that's the closing of the book on Mohamed Fayad, because they did not show him at the funeral, and he was at Diana's funeral. So we don't see him. And in real life, he was at the funeral. So it's interesting, and I wonder if they're just closing the book on that. But it's a great point you bring up. Going back, can we read the news stories, and were they told through a bit of a racist point of view? Because it's clear the Queen didn't want anything to do with him, and we see even his secretary come in and say, or his assistant come in and say, they haven't responded at all to about the poem you want to put in the casket. Nothing. So clearly it was a wall that was there, and he could not climb over.
Yeah, he was such a complex character. I mean, there's so much back and forth of that. I mean, how did you get to the point where you have that conversation between, where he's telling that Dodi that you never deserved to become partner in my company, to that moment of forgiveness, and then you have the moment where they send back the poem that he wanted them to include in her coffin, and like somehow that makes my heart break for him in some way. But then at some point he's also just like, oh, they're my brothers in mourning, like this is going to connect us. And I'm just like, how are you still trying to like it just was like, it was heartbreaking actually to sort of see. But he plays it all so well. I think it is balanced in some ways, but I think even in this portrayal, like I said, ultimately he is pretty villainous in these first 4 episodes overall. They do give him some redemption, I think, there at the end. But there's a lot going on with this character this season. I want to actually go back and rewatch last season, because I wish I would have thought to do that before, because like I said, that one episode that focuses on him I thought was so incredibly well done. Definitely, I think it was my favorite episode of last season. But to go back and watch that and kind of see how it all connects back to this, I'll just be kind of curious to see how seamless the sort of transition is, or was this really a massive departure in making him the sort of villain of this season? I could say.
I haven't seen too many articles that are like saying, oh, this is a terrible portrayal of Mohamed Fayad, but maybe I should do more research and see if there are some from like other areas of the world that are writing about this season and last season and saying the portrayal is not 100%. Because even last season, you're right. It's a very complicated man, because in a way you can empathize and sympathize with him, because he comes from these poorer quarters and he really just wanted to achieve this level of notoriety. It drove him to create this massive business, but yet we have him being racist, but then he has this incredible relationship with this butler. But does he have this relationship if this butler wasn't connected to the monarchy? These are the questions that you have to kind of come to terms with. And I like that this is a complicated character in that way, because most people who achieve that level of wealth are pretty complicated effing people. So I like that they weave that in here. Let's deal with the grief with the sons. What did you think about William and Harry? They're older now, so we're seeing the age difference and the size difference between them, but also them slowly navigating their worlds and dealing with their mom's boyfriends in the tabloids. We have that scene where Charles wants to take the pictures with them to kind of counter Diana's pictures, and they're pushed back on their dad. And then later on, we see them dealing with the death of their mother, and William going off for like 14 hours or 16 hours, which never happened, by the way. That's all fabricated for the show. Yeah. And so what did you think about how this was laid out and portrayed as kind of a teaser for what we're going to get more William and Harry as the new episodes show up in December?
Yeah, definitely more emphasis on William, I think, is what we can anticipate in episodes to come. But in a little bit more emphasis on him here. I thought the way in particular that they deliver the news of Diana's death to the boys in taking the dialogue out, and you just kind of hear the bass rumbling sound in the background, I thought was very effective. I thought that was really well done. That was one of those things where I'm like, do they just not want to get too intimate of a moment with these characters? And so they're kind of backing off and being a little, it felt tasteful, actually, the way that they did it.
Yeah.
I thought that was really well done. But the fact that we get, the funeral, them walking behind the casket, and we have that line from Philip telling you, they're not crying for her, they're crying for you. Like that, it was just, I mean, that was gut-wrenching to watch. Just so hard to watch. And especially, I think who knows how it actually played out in real life, but the fact that they had Harry's birthday present like delivered to him after she had died, I'm like, oh God. I mean, just absolutely brutal. But these actors, I thought, did a great job. I thought William in particular does a good job of kind of balancing that willful, rebellious teenager, but obviously you can't go too far with it. He's the future king, for Christ's sake. So it's not, they can't push it too far. But overall, I thought that these two actors did a really good job. If I recall correctly, I think, are we going to have a time jump? I think we're going to have a different William and Harry later in this season. So we only get these guys for a short time, but overall, I thought they had a really strong performance. What was your interpretation?
Yeah, no, I liked both of them. I thought they had really nice chemistry as brothers. I thought I liked that, although they kind of pushed William aside a little bit in the Aftermath episode, there was still enough to understand and empathize and connect with William and go with him as he navigated this journey. Because we do see Charles walk out on the thing by himself and collapse and wail, dealing with Diana's death. So I like that he just took off, and we didn't know where he was, and we saw him kind of walking in certain spots, but then we didn't spend all this time with him and didn't go on this journey in the woods of accepting his mother's death. He didn't have a scene with his mom's ghost or anything like that. So they let it be that he went off and everyone was just freaking out about it. And then came back, and it's kind of like he's come back in a different place about the whole situation. And I wonder if that's going to be something that gets touched upon later on as the season progresses and as we see a different William, if that's something that comes up. But the Harry stuff I thought was really nice too. That gave you just enough. And clearly, because we know this, because Harry has spoken about this in real life, his connection with his mother was very deep and very emotional. And so this is something that he's still spoken about navigating. He has talked about it attached to his mental health issues at times. And so seeing the love and affection between Harry and his mom in these 4 episodes, I thought was really touching and smart to lay the groundwork of what their relationship actually was. And her relationship with William, which was playful, but William was always kind of just scanning everything to see, what's the right thing, protective of his mother, didn't like to put his guard down too much. And so all of that I thought worked really well. And I like that they had their own language. What do they call him? The poser with Dodi. And and then they were, willing to push back on their father about people are going to make fun of us if we wear kilts. We're not going to wear kilts. That kind of stuff. So I thought they gave enough, and there could have been more, but I thought they gave enough for me to enjoy what they were doing with the kids, for sure. What about Imelda Staunton? We don't get much with the Queen here.
No.
We should wrap up with that with Queen and Philip. We don't get much with them, and certainly hardly anything with Margaret, other than that phone call. So, what are your thoughts on this? Some people complained that last season she was kind of pushed a little bit aside for the Diana Charles stuff. Do you feel the same way here in these first 4 episodes? Does she feel pushed aside, or did we have enough to kind of enjoy from Imelda Staunton here?
I mean, I think we had enough. The show's called The Crown. It's not just about her. It's meant to sort of, I think, encompass the entire line,
for sure,
that will eventually take the crown. So I didn't have too much of a problem of her being pushed aside. The official podcast for the show had her on the first episode and did a brief interview, and Imelda Staunton had mentioned that last season she came in and she was kind of she was very nervous and very scared and just wanted to get it right, and she said she felt a lot more relaxed in the role, a lot more at home kind of in the role this season, which I think you can kind of feel. I think I thought that came off, but I also thought she seemed very relaxed last season. So she's just a brilliant actress.
That's true, she is.
But she's got her sort of own complicated villainous moments, and I can't help in some of those scenes, but it's giving Dolores Umbridge just a little bit, some of those moments. Like I'm sorry, you can't help it. But her season 5, it really explores her relationship with the British public and how kind of out of touch she is. In the first 4 episodes of this season, at least, kind of keep that going and go even further to kind of emphasize how much of a hands-off parent she was. I mean, at every single turn, Margaret's telling her in that phone call, like, to be happy for Charles. Charles is trying in vain for her attention and love and loses to a corgi eventually. And then he has to, basically lecture her at the end about how she should and shouldn't be reacting to Diana's death as far as the public is concerned. And it's just really, I think she's such an interesting character because the fact that she's so committed to this stiff upper lip reaction to every tragic thing that befalls the country or their family, that there's just no evolution in that. It never goes past, like, it just is kind of incredible. Like, there's no change ever in that one point for her. And I mean, we see her kind of soften a little bit. She delivers that speech. But it just is kind of remarkable to me that stubbornness is still there, that they just don't learn. I think Charles even has that line at some point. He's just like, well, we can't have it both ways and we just don't learn. And I thought that portrayal, I think, has been really solid since Imelda Staunton stepped into the role. What have you thought of her?
Oh yeah, I thought, of course, she's a phenomenal actress. And what I was saying earlier about focusing on Debicki, I just meant that because she is the stronger energy in terms of Diana in the show, you kind of have to push everyone else aside because Diana is such a massive person to profile. But talent-wise, of course, Imelda Staunton, one of the greatest actresses walking the earth. And I think she's brought a different energy to Elizabeth that we have not seen from Claire or from Olivia. And I think you nailed it. It is the more slightly villainous instincts. I mean, the way she's dismissive with Charles about going to the party because she has to go to Derbyshire to open a plant. And Charles is like, well, you can sleep at the house and you can at least be there and then take off from there. And she's like, no, there's no reason to change these plans. These are set in stone. It's pretty fine. And I got to talk to this corgi if we're done. And so you're right. I mean, these little moments where you don't want to like her, because I loved Claire Foy I was cheering for Claire Foy's Elizabeth through those first 2 seasons, and mostly for Olivia Colman's Elizabeth until the Diana stuff started happening for those 2 seasons as well. But with Imelda, it's been an interesting navigation because last season, dealing with the emergence of Diana as a massive force in the world with the tabloids and the pictures, then the divorce, and then also finding out stuff about her husband, more about her husband's background and getting shunted to the side on that as well, and dealing with Thatcher and how that interaction earlier was going on as well. Oh no, was it Thatcher that she dealt with Thatcher? Or was that Olivia Colman? I thought that was Imelda with Thatcher.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know we had a lot of John. Oh gosh, what was the prime minister's name
Oh yeah,
last
John
season?
Major. Right. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
John Major.
So
Yeah,
maybe that was
that was the
more.
only one I remember.
Okay. So maybe that was more that kind of interaction there. So, but seeing that, I thought was great. To see. Right. Because Thatcher was villainous for the Olivia Colman series, so we had to make Elizabeth villainous in this series to a degree. And yeah, and then when she's having the interactions about Diana and says, one would almost feel sympathy for her if one didn't know any better about her. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, that's so nice. And again, I thought Peter Morgan did a nice job of just giving you a dash of it, because if you want to see the full spectrum of that, you can watch Helen Mirren as the Queen in Peter Morgan's film The Queen, which is all about her navigating the death of Diana and what have you, and how out of touch she was to the public. So seeing her have these conversations, and again, having to kind of change her point of view, having to hear from other people and adjust her idea of tradition over the modern world, we see her slowly changing. And I have a feeling that by the end of the season, we are going to love her again, as we did in the first couple of seasons under Claire Foy, because Elizabeth is going to become this, how can I say this icon in essence, and people are going to be more aware of like that she's been able to endure for so long, for so many decades, through so many changes, and still retain grace and nobility and dignity as the leader of the British people in essence. And so I think that's coming. But for right now, we have her in this transition spot, and even her delivering the live speech, you can tell she doesn't want to do it, but she's doing it because she feels like she has to kind of smooth things over with the British people and what have you. So, yeah, I thought those were great scenes for her, and getting just enough, and her caring for William and Harry, I thought was a really nice moment as well to see from her in the portrayal of Elizabeth as well. So a little more malleable than you might expect, but that's what happens when you get older. You become a little more malleable. So, you become more stubborn in some ways, but you also become more malleable in other ways. So I like that we're progressing through that. Anything more we should touch on here from these first 4 episodes that we missed, Laura, that you want to make sure we throw in here? Because I feel like we've covered most of everything.
Yeah, I think there's one other point I wanted to make was just that I wonder if this series that started off as like this sort of very expensive, very pretty period piece, essentially, has now crept up into the 90s. We're not too far away, now in 2023. We're not too far from the 1990s. So to kind of, we can't set something in that time period and think of it as a period piece. It kind of just doesn't work anymore. So, despite that, those events took place over 20 years ago.
Look at Laura trying not to say that she's older. Okay, Laura, I get it. The 90s is
every time that was another thing that they said in the podcast of the show. They were just like, oh yeah, we're coming up on like 20 years, and then they mentioned like the year 2000, 2001 is like maybe when they're going to end, and I was like, oh my god, that was 20 years. Holy crap. Like it just numbers, man, in time. Yeah. So despite the fact that these events took place, over 20 years ago, the fact that it's approaching present day, I don't think the tone has shifted dramatically since season 4 and season 5, but it's definitely a different ball game than season 1.
Yes.
I think that's fair to say. And I think that the people who are seemingly still upset about the creative liberties that this series takes, we're on season 6. Like we've been at this for 6 seasons. It's been almost 10 years.
Yeah.
The show has never claimed to be a historical reenactment. It's drama, it's story, it's entertainment. And I like how this season, I think in particular, feels like a bit of a time capsule. You've got the fashion, the music, the movies that they're discussing and that they watch in episode 1, the AOL dial-up noise. I appreciated all of that and all of those components and how they played into this season.
That's excellent. You point all that out, Laura, for sure. It's like things that I just kind of gloss over because I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's true. That's accurate to show these little things that for 90s kids were a big deal, right? And so it makes sense to have those moments like Jumanji and the dial-up and all of these things happen. The website, when they go to the website itself, what that means, even grandma is like, what is, she asks, what logging on. She's like logging on, and she's like, it's not about the forest, grandma. So I love that they have those little interactions and those moments with that. They give you the reality and set it in the time capsule that is in the 90s. That's an excellent point for sure. And I wonder how but I've seen some critics, and I do want to say maybe this is my final point on what you brought up here. I've seen some critics say, and especially I was reading the Time review on it. They're like, "Oh, it's kind of sank into melodrama," and I'm like, "Yeah, because that's what this is now." As we go into the 90s and the 2000s, is that the royal family became all about the melodrama because of Prince Andrew, Charles and Diana, Charles and Camilla, and then it started to come out some stuff about Philip. So, and then we get William and Kate, and then we get Harry and Meghan. So yes, it becomes melodrama because the world has changed. And the British of the 90s and the 2000s are not as important to the world order as they were in the 50s and 60s and 70s to a degree. So there's less that they are necessarily impacting around the world globally. And I think that's why the melodrama has become more of the focus of the series, because the Falkland Islands is really, and of course the Thatcher years are really the last time where it's like the British public and being aware of all this stuff. It's not as strong, and so we'll see how much of that the world issues that Britain is involved in, that it would be like the pop culture mainstream would be aware of it, that they're going to dial into, but there's not that much. So naturally you have to dial into the melodrama and so it seems odd to me that people aren't more aware that that's actually the thing, that's going on at that time. So, but we'll see. We'll see how it all progresses. But we've got a few more episodes to go. It's coming back in the middle of December. So we have to wait, Laura, like another 3 weeks for this thing to come back. But it'll be the final 6. So it'll be a lot to consume for sure. And we'll see where it all ends up in terms of the characters. And I don't know, I don't know if they're going all the way to her death, or are they going to the Harry and Meghan? I just don't know how far they're going. So I'm very
I feel like I had heard it was like 2003 or 5 was like as far as it was going to go. They're not going to, but that was kind of the elephant in the room and sort of hanging over the entire series, is I think when they had just started filming, that was when Queen Elizabeth died. So that was, I'm sure that was definitely something to contend with when it came to shooting this series.
Yeah, and maybe they don't want to touch the Harry and Meghan situation for fear that it could be a combustible thing to open up for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. That's our spoiler review for the first 4 episodes of season 6 of The Crown. I think you can tell Laura and I both enjoyed it, even though it's gotten mixed reviews. We are on the side of liking it, but we'd love to hear what you think. What did you think about the first 4 episodes? What did you think about all the portrayals here, the storylines that they used, how they did Diana's death and the accident? Did you like the way they used that? The ghost stuff, quote unquote ghost stuff. Did you like any of that? And what did you feel was missing if you didn't like these first 4 episodes? Let us know down in the comments section below. Laura, another fun review with you. I love talking The Crown with you. Time just flies away. Please let everybody know where you can be found and everything you're working on, please.
Sure. The thing that this season's missing so far is Lesley Manville as Princess Margaret. We need more of that. That's what I'll put it out there.
Yes.
But if you want to come follow me on Twitter, it is at @shutup_Laura. You can find me at the same handle on Instagram, and most of those places I am just talking not exclusively about Star Wars, but a lot about Star Wars. And you can find the show that I host with my friend Alice called Forced Toast, a Star Wars happy hour, at Forced Toast Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find me here with John and Kevin Smets right here on his channel talking about Star Wars on the Jedi Way. So be on the lookout for new episodes of that, hopefully coming soon when there is stuff to talk about. There has not been a lot of Star Wars news happening recently, but here's hoping that we get some soon.
Yeah, here's hoping for sure. As for me, you can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, as you see there. And please make sure you subscribe to the channel down below. As Laura said, the Jedi Way is on the channel, but also the Hot Mic, the Geek Buddies, my reviews, my reactions. There's a lot that happens on this channel. We'd love to have you come aboard and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button while you're here. All right, take care of yourselves. Be well. Have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy your holidays. And we will see you, or holiday, and we will see you here for the review for the last episodes of The Crown as we wrap up the entire series. I am so bummed thinking about that. And we'll see you then next time on another brand new review here on the Outlaw Nation. Take care until then.